I don't care if you passed the bar at some unaccredited strip mall law school. Judge Nicholas Foster's gavel cracked like a whip, silencing the gasps in the gallery. You do not accuse my court of theft. That is a $3,000 fine for contempt. Shall we make it 10? Alicia adjusted her crooked, smudged glasses, her voice a fragile whisper. No, Your Honor. I apologize. He smirked, thinking he had crushed another pathetic legal aid lawyer. He had no idea he was extorting the president of the State Bar Association. The wooden benches were deeply scarred by the fingernails of thousands of desperate people who had sat exactly where Stephanie was sitting now. To the citizens of the county, it was known as the collection agency. To the vultures who operated within its walls, it was a highly profitable enterprise built on the absolute weaponization of the law. Alicia Vance sat at the defense table, deliberately shrinking her posture until her shoulders rounded and her spine curved in a display of total, subservient defeat. She had spent an hour that morning curating her disguise with the meticulous care of an undercover operative. She wore a shapeless, mud-brown blazer that was 2 sizes too large, a faded beige turtleneck, and scuffed, rubber-soled shoes. Her thick, natural hair was tightly bound and hidden beneath an unflattering, wide-brimmed synthetic wig. A pair of thick, crooked glasses sat heavily on her nose, completely obscuring the piercing, analytical sharpness in her dark eyes. She looked exactly like what they wanted her to be, a drowning, underfunded public advocate who had taken a pro bono case she couldn't possibly handle. Beside her sat Stephanie, a 26-year-old mother, who looked as though she had aged a decade in the last 72 hours. Stephanie's hands were trembling so violently that Alicia had to gently place her own hand over them to keep the table from vibrating. Stephanie wasn't facing jail time. She was facing something much more insidious, a legal loophole so heavily abused it bordered on pure highway robbery. Civil asset forfeiture. 3 days ago, Stephanie was pulled over for a busted taillight. In her trunk was a locked firebox containing $45,000 in cash. It was the culmination of 2 years of bake sales, GoFundMe donations, and liquidating her late mother's meager estate. The money was destined for a specialized pediatric hospital in Boston to pay for a life-altering spinal surgery for her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The police had seized every cent, claiming a K-9 unit had alerted to the scent of narcotics on the bills. No drugs were found. Stephanie was never charged with a crime. But under the twisted mechanics of civil forfeiture, the money itself was put on trial, presumed guilty until proven innocent. Breathe, Stephanie, Alicia murmured, her voice a stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. It was a rich, melodic hum, laced with an unshakable calm. They are going to try to intimidate you. Look at the table. Do not look at the judge. But Lily's surgery is scheduled for Monday, Stephanie whispered, a tear spilling over her eyelashes and tracing a clean line down her exhausted face. If we don't wire the funds by tomorrow at noon, they give her spot to another child. We'll have to wait another year. She can't wait another year, Miss Vance. She won't have to, Alicia said softly. I made you a promise. Across the aisle, at the plaintiff's table, lounging with the arrogant ease of a lion in a pen full of sheep, was Joshua. He was the city's contracted forfeiture prosecutor, a private attorney hired to liquidate seized assets. Joshua was a man who wore his greed on his sleeve. His bespoke, sapphire blue suit was tailored to a fraction of an inch, a thick gold chain peeked from his unbuttoned collar, and he spent the entire pre-trial wait admiring his own reflection in the dark screen of his smartphone. Joshua didn't see human lives. He saw percentages, payouts, and luxury car payments. Above them all sat Judge Nicholas Foster. Foster was a man of imposing physical bulk, with a flushed, heavy-jowled face and eyes that held the permanent, lazy cruelty of a man who had never been told no. He operated courtroom 104 like his personal fiefdom. Let's get this over with, Foster grumbled, loudly sipping from a ceramic coffee mug. He didn't even bother looking at the docket. He waved a pudgy hand at his court clerk. Stephen, read the caption. Stephen, a painfully thin man with a nervous tic that made his left eye twitch constantly, cleared his throat. He adjusted his silk tie, a piece of clothing far too expensive for a clerk's salary. Case number 402B, the state versus $45,000 in United States currency. Motion for final forfeiture judgment. Joshua stood, buttoning his jacket with a theatrical sigh. Good morning, Your Honor. This is a textbook case. The currency in question was discovered during a lawful traffic stop. A certified narcotics K-9 alerted to the cash, indicating it was the proceeds of illegal drug trafficking. The state moves to finalize the forfeiture and transfer the funds to the precinct's operational budget. He didn't present a single piece of evidence. He didn't call the arresting officer. He just smiled up at the bench. Alicia stood, adjusting her crooked glasses. Objection, Your Honor. Alicia Vance, representing the claimant, Stephanie Miller. The state's motion is baseless. I have submitted a 300-page dossier containing bank withdrawal receipts, certified GoFundMe ledger statements, and letters from Boston Pediatric Hospital confirming the exact required amount of $45,000. The money is entirely legitimate. Judge Foster let out a loud, highly exaggerated groan. He picked up the thick dossier Alicia had filed, weighed it in his hand for a second, and then dramatically dropped it into the trash can beside his desk. Stephanie gasped audibly. Counselor Vance, Foster sneered, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. I don't care how many fake receipts you printed off the internet. A sworn police K-9 alerted to the money. That is probable cause. Drug dealers often use sob stories about sick children to launder their cash. Your Honor, my client has no criminal record, Alicia stated, keeping her voice carefully modulated to sound desperate but determined. Furthermore, federal studies show that over 80% of all circulating U.S. currency contains trace amounts of narcotics. A K-9 alert on cash, without the presence of actual drugs, is legally insufficient for seizure under the Eighth Amendment. Joshua let out a booming laugh. Your Honor, is she trying to lecture you on constitutional law? She looks like she got dressed in the dark at a thrift store. Objection, Alicia snapped, injecting a tremor into her voice. Counsel's personal insults do not negate the complete lack of evidence. Overruled, Foster barked, his face turning a shade of violent magenta. He leaned over the massive mahogany bench, pointing a thick, accusing finger directly at Alicia. You listen to me, you little nuisance. You come into my courtroom, defending a drug mule, and you dare to accuse my police officers of theft? You dare to cite the Constitution to me? I am citing the law, Your Honor, because the law requires. Crack. The gavel struck the wood with deafening force. I don't care if you passed the bar at some unaccredited strip mall law school, Foster roared, spit flying from his lips. You do not accuse my court of theft. That is a $3,000 fine for contempt. Shall we make it 10? Keep talking, little lady. See what happens. The courtroom fell dead silent. Stephen the clerk's fingers flew across his keyboard, eagerly deleting Alicia's legal objections from the official digital transcript. It was an orchestrated, flawless machine of corruption. Alicia stood perfectly still. To Joshua and Foster, she looked paralyzed by fear. But behind the smudged lenses of her glasses, Alicia's mind was cold, calculating, and ruthlessly committing every spoken word to memory. No, Your Honor, Alicia whispered, bowing her head in feigned submission. I apologize. I will pay the fine. See that you do, by 5 o'clock today, or I'll issue a bench warrant for your arrest. Foster spat, a cruel, victorious smile spreading across his face. Final forfeiture is granted. The money belongs to the state. We are adjourned. Stephanie buried her face in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably, the sound a ragged, heartbreaking sound of total despair. Joshua whistled a cheerful tune as he snapped his briefcase shut, winking at Stephen the clerk before sauntering out the door. Alicia knelt beside Stephanie, wrapping an arm around the devastated mother. Stephanie, look at me, she ordered gently. Stephanie looked up, her eyes red and swollen. It's gone. Lily's surgery. It's gone. It is not gone, Alicia said, her voice suddenly shifting. The frail, trembling tone vanished entirely. Her words were sharp, heavy, and struck like steel. I told you to trust me. The trap is officially set. Go home, pack your bags for Boston, and wait for my call. As Alicia walked out of the courtroom, she didn't look like a defeated public defender. She moved with the silent, terrifying grace of a predator that had just locked onto its prey. Nicholas Foster had just signed away $45,000. He didn't know he had just signed his own destruction. The municipal archives room was located in the deepest, forgotten sub-basement of the courthouse. It was a windowless concrete bunker filled with towering metal shelves of decaying paper, smelling strongly of dust, mildew, and rotting cardboard. The single fluorescent bulb overhead flickered sporadically, casting long, nervous shadows across the floor. Alicia stood in the center of the aisle, her posture completely transformed. She had discarded the oversized brown blazer and the terrible synthetic wig, tossing them into a nearby dumpster. Her natural hair fell in elegant, dark cascades. She wore a tailored, slate-gray sheath dress beneath a pristine white trench coat. She checked her minimalist silver watch. She was exactly on time. Footsteps echoed softly from the stairwell. A young woman stepped into the dim light, looking over her shoulder with the frantic, wide-eyed paranoia of a hunted animal. It was Jenna, a second-year associate at Joshua's law firm. Jenna clutched a sleek, black leather folio to her chest, her knuckles white with tension. "Your Vance?" Jenna whispered, her voice trembling in the damp air. "I am," Alicia replied, her voice smooth and commanding. "You took a massive risk coming here, Jenna. I appreciate your courage." Jenna let out a choked, bitter laugh. "Courage? I haven't slept in 3 days. If Joshua finds out I contacted opposing counsel, he won't just ruin my career. He'll have the police pull me over and plant a brick of heroin in my trunk. I've seen them do it." "Tell me exactly how the machine works," Alicia demanded, stepping closer, her eyes locking onto the terrified junior lawyer. Jenna swallowed hard, opening the leather folio with shaking hands. "It's a 3-way pipeline. The police precinct targets out-of-state license plates or vulnerable locals people like your client. They make a bogus traffic stop, hit the remote control in their pocket to make the K9 bark, and seize whatever cash is in the car." "And Joshua?" Alicia prompted. Joshua's firm was contracted by the city to act as the independent litigator for all civil forfeitures, Jenna explained rapidly. "But it's not independent. Joshua takes a 40% contingency fee on every dollar seized. He makes millions. But he can't keep it all." Jenna pulled a thick stack of paper from the folio and handed it to Alicia. "This is the shadow ledger. I copied it from a hidden partition on Joshua's server. To keep the pipeline flowing, Joshua kicks 20% back to Judge Foster." Alicia's eyes scanned the complex spreadsheets, her mind instantly deciphering the labyrinth of shell companies and fake consulting fees. A judge taking direct bribes from a prosecutor. It's not just unethical, it's a federal RICO violation. "They don't call it bribes," Jenna whispered. "They funnel the money into a super PAC set up for Foster's upcoming state Supreme Court campaign. And Stephen the clerk? He gets 5% to alter the digital transcripts. If a victim tries to appeal the forfeiture, Stephen changes the court record so the victim sounds unhinged and belligerent, ensuring the appellate court throws the case out." Alicia closed the ledger. The sheer scale of the corruption was breathtaking. They weren't just stealing money. They were systematically dismantling the lives of the poor to fund their own luxury and political ambitions. "Why are you giving this to me?" Alicia asked, her gaze piercing through the dim light. "I looked like a disorganized, incompetent legal aid worker this morning. Why trust me with a death sentence for your boss?" Jenna looked at Alicia, taking in the striking transformation, the immaculate clothing, the regal posture, the terrifying intelligence radiating from her eyes. "Because of how you took that fine," Jenna said quietly. "I was in the gallery. Foster screamed at you. He humiliated you in front of a packed room. Anyone else would have cried, or panicked, or fought back blindly. You just took it. You looked at him like he was a bug you were planning to step on. I knew right then, you weren't who you were pretending to be." Jenna took a deep breath, her eyes pleading. "I can testify, Vance. I can authenticate these ledgers. But I need federal protection. Joshua has half the police force on his payroll. If I go to the local authorities, I'm dead." Alicia carefully slid the shadow ledger into her own briefcase. A cold, predatory smile touched the corners of her lips. It was a smile that had ended the careers of corrupt senators and predatory billionaires. "You don't need to worry about the local authorities, Jenna," Alicia said smoothly, "because I don't operate on a local level." "Who are you?" Jenna asked, her voice filled with awe. Alicia reached into her trench coat pocket and pulled out a solid gold badge, flipping it open to reveal the state seal. "My name is Alicia Vance," she stated, her voice echoing with absolute authority in the concrete room. "I am the president of the State Bar Association, and for the last 6 months, I have been running a covert, federally sanctioned task force investigating judicial extortion in this county." Jenna gasped, stumbling back a half step, her hand flying to her mouth. "You laid a trap," Jenna realized, her eyes widening in shock. "Stephanie Miller's GoFundMe was real," Alicia said, her eyes darkening like a coming storm. "The surgery for her daughter is real. But the $45,000 in her trunk? That was provided by the United States Treasury." Jenna's breath hitched. "Go back to your office, Jenna," Alicia commanded gently. "Pack up your personal belongings and go home. Do not answer any calls from Joshua tomorrow morning, because when court opens at 9 o'clock, I am going to bring the sky down on their heads." At 8:55 a.m. the next morning, courtroom 104 was a hive of miserable activity. The gallery was packed with a new batch of victims waiting to be separated from their property. At the plaintiff's table, Joshua was in high spirits. He was wearing a silver silk tie, scrolling through a luxury car catalog on his tablet, completely unaware that a noose was tightening around his neck. Judge Foster burst from his chambers, his black robes billowing, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his heavy face. He slammed his gavel down, instantly silencing the room. "Let's get to work, Stephen," Foster barked happily. "Call the first lamb to the slaughter." Stephen the clerk began to speak, but before a single word left his mouth, the heavy oak double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding bang that rattled the hinges. Every head in the room snapped backward. Alicia Vance walked down the center aisle. The transformation from the previous day was so jarring, so absolute, that a collective gasp rippled through the gallery. She wore a flawlessly tailored, blood-red blazer over a black silk blouse, her dark hair pulled back into an immaculate, razor-sharp chignon. She didn't walk. She marched. She radiated an aura of raw, terrifying power that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. Trailing 2 steps behind her were 2 towering men in impeccably pressed dark suits. They wore earpieces, and the distinct, heavy bulge of sidearms was visible beneath their jackets. Joshua dropped his tablet. It clattered loudly onto the wooden table. He stared at Alicia, his jaw literally dropping. Judge Foster leaned forward, his face immediately flushing an angry, bewildered purple. "Vance, what is the meaning of this theatrical nonsense? I finalized your case yesterday, and who are these armed men in my courtroom?" Alicia didn't stop at the defense table. She bypassed it completely, walking directly to the center podium, stopping just a few feet from the judge's elevated bench. She unlatched a sleek, silver briefcase and slammed it onto the podium. "I am here, Nicholas, to file a motion to reconsider the seizure of Stephanie Miller's funds based on newly discovered, catastrophic prosecutorial misconduct." Alicia's voice boomed through the room. It wasn't the fragile whisper of a public defender. It was the voice of a conqueror. She deliberately dropped the title, "Your Honor." Foster's eyes bulged in absolute fury. "How dare you address me by my first name? You are completely out of your mind. I already warned you. I hold you in direct, malicious contempt of court. I am fining you $15,000, payable this exact second, and I am ordering the bailiff to place you in handcuffs." It was the ultimate flex of his tyranny. He expected her to cower. He expected her to beg. Alicia didn't blink. She reached into her blazer, pulled out a sleek, black metal checkbook, and produced a heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen. With agonizing, deliberate slowness, she wrote out a check for $15,000. She turned, walked over to Stephen the clerk's desk, and slapped the check down. "Paid in full," Alicia said, her voice dropping to an icy, sub-zero register. She leaned in slightly, looking the terrified clerk directly in his twitching eye. "Just make sure you don't delete this from the transcript, Stephen. The federal agents listening outside would be very disappointed." Stephen whimpered, his face draining of all color. He shrunk back in his chair as if Alicia was made of fire. Alicia turned her back on the clerk and locked her blazing eyes onto Judge Foster. "What are you talking about?" Foster yelled, a sudden, sharp edge of panic bleeding into his rage. He looked at Joshua, who was frozen in his seat, desperately trying to understand what was happening. "You stole $45,000 from a single mother yesterday, Nicholas," Alicia stated, her voice echoing off the walls. And within 2 hours, Joshua transferred that exact amount into the Justice for Tomorrow Political Action Committee. "Your pack. That is a lie," Joshua suddenly shrieked, jumping to his feet, his pristine suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. "That money was logged into the precinct evidence room." "No, Joshua, it wasn't," Alicia smiled, a terrifying, predatory expression that chilled the room. "Because I didn't come here to defend a drug mule. I came here to hunt you." Alicia opened her silver briefcase. She pulled out a small, heavy black flashlight. "The $45,000 in the trunk of that car did not belong to my client," Alicia announced to the dead-silent courtroom. "It belonged to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and every single bill was coated in a microscopic, invisible UV dye." Foster slumped back in his leather chair as if he had been struck by a physical blow. The color vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified old man. "This morning, at 6 a.m., federal agents executed a warrant on the bank holding your PAC funds," Alicia continued relentlessly, her voice a hammer driving nails into their coffins. "They scanned the cash deposits. The vault lit up like a Christmas tree. We have the money. We have your shadow ledger. We have your communications." Joshua fell back into his chair, clutching his chest, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack seized him. Who are you?" Foster whispered hoarsely, his hand shaking so violently he dropped his gavel. It rolled off the desk and hit the floor with a pathetic thud. "My name is Alicia Vance," she said, her voice ringing with the absolute finality of justice. "I am the president of the State Bar Association, and as of this morning, you are stripped of your robes." Alicia turned slightly and gave a single, sharp nod to the two suited men behind her. One of them raised his wrist to his mouth. "Execute." The back doors of the courtroom burst open, slamming against the walls. A dozen heavily armed federal agents, wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the bright yellow letters, FBI, swarmed into the room. Nicholas Foster, Joshua Trent, Stephen Hayes. The lead agent barked, pulling a thick stack of warrants from his vest. "You are under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, extortion, and money laundering." The gallery erupted into chaos, a mixture of shocked screams and sudden, thunderous applause, as the agents dragged the screaming, sobbing men out from behind their desks, slamming cold steel handcuffs onto their wrists. The collection agency was closed permanently. The stark, windowless interrogation room at the FBI field office was a masterclass in psychological discomfort. The walls were painted a nauseating shade of institutional beige. The air conditioning was cranked to a deliberate, shivering chill, and the single steel table was bolted firmly to the concrete floor. It was a room designed to strip away ego. Nicholas Foster was currently failing to grasp this concept. "I demand my phone," Foster bellowed, his heavy fists slamming against the steel table. His black judicial robes had been confiscated during processing, leaving him in a wrinkled, sweat-stained dress shirt and gray slacks. Without his elevated bench, he looked remarkably small, like a deflated balloon. "You cannot hold a sitting judge in a cage like a common vagrant. I want the governor on the line right now. I want the chief of police. You are all committing career suicide." Across the table, Special Agent Miller sat in absolute silence, methodically organizing a stack of manila folders. He didn't even blink at Foster's outburst. In the corner of the room, pacing like a caged, panicked ferret, was Joshua. The brilliant sapphire blue suit that had looked so commanding in the courtroom 2 hours ago was now rumpled and stained with nervous sweat. His silk tie was askew, his perfectly styled hair unraveling. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting toward the heavy steel door every few seconds. "Nicholas, shut up," Joshua hissed, his voice trembling. "Just shut up. Don't say another word until my partners get here. The firm is sending the senior defense team. We just have to hold out. They're going to file an emergency writ of habeas corpus, and we'll be out on bail by dinner." "Bail?" Foster spat, his face flushing violently. "I shouldn't even be processed. This is a rogue operation by a hysterical bar president who doesn't understand political realities. When my allies in the state legislature hear about this, they will defund her entire task force." The heavy steel door unlocked with a loud, resounding clack. Alicia Vance stepped into the room. She had removed the blood-red blazer, leaving her in a sharp, intimidating black silk blouse. She carried no briefcase, no files, no notepad. She didn't need them. She walked with the terrifying, unhurried grace of an executioner stepping onto the scaffold. Foster lunged forward against his handcuffs, which were secured to a ring on the table. You unhinged, power-drunk lunatic. Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? The legal establishment in this state will bury you. The legal establishment in this state is currently watching your arrest on a continuous loop on every major news network. Nicholas, Alicia said smoothly, pulling out a metal chair and taking a seat opposite him. She crossed her legs, leaning back with supreme, untouchable confidence. "My firm will ruin you, Vance." Joshua sneered, though his voice cracked humiliatingly. "You think you're so smart with your UV dye? That's entrapment." The senior partners at Trent, Sterling, and Hayes are drafting the lawsuit right now. "We have a $50 million war chest. We will tie you up in civil litigation until you're bankrupt." Alicia turned her dark, piercing eyes toward Joshua. The absolute stillness of her gaze made the young prosecutor physically flinch. "Trent, Sterling, and Hayes." Alicia repeated softly, testing the syllables on her tongue. "A formidable firm. Or, at least, it was until 9:30 a.m. this morning." Joshua froze, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. "What are you talking about?" Alicia reached into her pocket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. She slid it across the stainless steel table toward Joshua. "This is a certified copy of an emergency corporate resolution," Alicia explained, her voice a calm, lethal melody. 20 minutes after your arrest, the executive board of your firm held an emergency vote. They didn't draft a lawsuit, Joshua. They drafted your expulsion. You have been unanimously removed as a partner. Your equity has been seized to cover the impending public relations damages, and your name has already been sandblasted off the glass doors of the lobby. Joshua stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. His hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled against the steel. No, Richard wouldn't do this. I made them millions." "You made them a liability," Alicia corrected sharply. "And parasites always detach from a dying host. You don't have a defense team coming, Joshua. You don't have a war chest. You have a public defender waiting in the hallway. I hear he's fresh out of law school. You'll be his very first felony case." Joshua let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper and sank back against the concrete wall, clutching his chest as if his heart were giving out. Foster watched the total collapse of his co-conspirator with growing, unmanageable terror, but his ego refused to surrender. "Fine, the boy was stupid. But you can't touch my political war chest. I have millions in the Justice for Tomorrow PAC. I will hire the best federal litigators in the country. My allies? Your allies are cowards." "Nicholas," Alicia interrupted, her voice dropping to a register that vibrated with suppressed thunder. The moment the FBI raided the PAC's bank, the governor held a live press conference. He claimed he was horrified by the allegations and officially disavowed you. The state Supreme Court issued a unanimous public statement condemning your actions. "You are a leper." Foster's heavy jaw trembled. The PAC money. I still have the funds. I can fight this." Alicia leaned forward, planting her elbows on the steel table, her eyes locking onto his with predatory intensity. "You really haven't grasped the poetry of this situation, have you, Nicholas? What was the charge you used to steal Stephanie Miller's money yesterday?" "Civil asset forfeiture," Foster whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Exactly." Alicia smiled, a terrifying, cold expression. "The legal doctrine that property suspected of involvement in a crime can be seized by the state without the owner ever being convicted. It's a ruthless, draconian law. And as of 10 a.m., the United States Department of Justice applied it to you." Foster's eyes bugged out of his head. "What?" "Under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, every single asset tied to your corrupt enterprise is subject to immediate civil forfeiture," Alicia stated, delivering the killing blow. Your PAC accounts are frozen. Your offshore Cayman trusts have been seized by the Treasury. The millions you extorted from innocent people have been locked in a federal vault. You have nothing. Foster stared at her, the final pillars of his arrogance completely crumbling into dust. He wasn't a king anymore. He was a beggar in a wrinkled shirt. He's bluffing. He wouldn't give them anything real, Joshua muttered to himself, pacing the length of the holding cell 3 hours later. His bespoke suit was now completely ruined, the knees dusty from where he had collapsed onto the floor in despair. Foster sat on the edge of the metal cot, staring blankly at the concrete wall. Stephen is a coward, but he doesn't know the full architecture of the Cayman accounts. Even if he talks, it's circumstantial. It's his word against a sitting judge. You aren't a sitting judge anymore, Nicholas. Joshua snapped, turning on him, the alliance fracturing under the immense pressure. You're a disgraced, radioactive target. If you hadn't gotten so greedy, if you hadn't demanded 20% of my hard work, we wouldn't be in this mess. Your hard work? Foster roared, surging to his feet. You arrogant little parasite. You couldn't successfully prosecute a parking ticket without me rubber stamping your fabricated evidence. I built this pipeline. The cell door swung open, cutting off their venomous exchange. 2 armed federal marshals stepped inside, flanking Alicia Vance. Gentlemen, Alicia said, her voice crisp and businesslike. It's time for the preliminary proffer session. Follow me. They were led down a long, brightly lit corridor into a massive, heavily soundproofed conference room. The room was dominated by a long mahogany table, littered with recording devices, thick legal binders, and glaring fluorescent monitors. Seated at the far end of the table, flanked by 2 federal prosecutors, was Stephen the clerk. Stephen looked terrible. His face was entirely devoid of color. His expensive silk tie was gone, and he was sweating profusely. But when he looked up and saw Joshua and Foster enter the room in handcuffs, a strange, spiteful spark ignited in his twitching eyes. Take a seat, Alicia commanded. The marshals forced Joshua and Foster into hard plastic chairs opposite their former lackey. What is this, Vance? Foster sneered, trying to muster a fraction of his old authority. A dog and pony show? You think this sweating rodent can corroborate a federal RICO charge? He's a low-level clerk trying to save his own skin by lying. Alicia didn't look at Foster. She looked at Stephen. She nodded once. Stephen cleared his throat, taking a trembling sip of water from a paper cup. At approximately 4 p.m. yesterday, shortly after the Miller forfeiture, I was approached by federal agents. I chose to cooperate fully. You spineless little rat. Joshua lunged across the table, only to be violently yanked back by the heavy chain connecting his cuffs to his waist belt. I bought you your house. I bought you your cars. I will bury you. You can't buy anything anymore, Josh, Stephen sneered, the fear suddenly melting into a toxic, vindictive pleasure. You're broke. And I gave them the server. Joshua froze, the blood draining from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. What server? You don't have access to the firm's mainframes. I don't, Stephen agreed. But I had access to the backup drive you kept hidden behind the false panel in my office closet. The one you used to mirror your encrypted ledger in case the firm ever got audited. You thought I was too stupid to figure out the passcode. It was your dog's name, you absolute moron. Alicia picked up a thick, bound document from the table and dropped it heavily in front of Joshua. 300 pages of encrypted transactions, Joshua. Dates, times, offshore routing numbers, and the corresponding case files of every single citizen you extorted. But that wasn't the most interesting thing Stephen provided. Alicia turned her gaze to Foster. The ex-judge was sweating now, his breath coming in shallow, panicked wheezes. Stephen didn't just alter transcripts. Nicholas, Alicia continued, her voice taking on a grim, terrifying cadence. He was your personal archivist, and he kept meticulous records of what you called the problem files. Foster squeezed his eyes shut. Don't, he whispered. 3 years ago, an independent investigative journalist named Marcus Reed started asking questions about the statistical anomaly of civil forfeitures in your courtroom, Alicia said, her voice echoing in the silent room. He filed FOIA requests. He requested interviews. And a week before he was scheduled to publish his exposé, his car was pulled over by officers from your precinct. Joshua swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the federal prosecutors, who were staring at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. They found 2 kilos of synthetic fentanyl in his trunk, Alicia said. A journalist with no criminal record, no history of drug use, suddenly driving around with $500,000 of narcotics. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. His life was destroyed. His family went bankrupt trying to defend him. Alicia leaned over the table, her face inches from Foster's. Stephen provided the audio recordings of you and Joshua ordering the precinct captain to plant those drugs. You didn't just steal money, Nicholas. You destroyed innocent lives to protect your kingdom. Foster looked at Stephen, his eyes filled with a murderous, impotent rage. I will kill you. I will reach out from whatever cell they put me in, and I will end you. You won't have the chance, Alicia stated coldly. Because of the sheer volume of the conspiracy, the destruction of evidence, and your direct threat against a federal witness, the U.S. attorney is denying bail. You aren't going home to prepare a defense, Nicholas. You are going to solitary confinement in a maximum security federal penitentiary to await trial. Foster slumped over the table, burying his face in his handcuffed wrists, a broken, shuddering sob escaping his lips. Alicia stood up, brushing a microscopic piece of lint from her flawless black sleeve. Enjoy your stay, gentlemen. The next time we speak, you will be wearing orange. The rain had finally cleared by Saturday morning, giving way to a brilliant, unforgiving sunlight that illuminated the city in sharp, undeniable clarity. For the residents of the exclusive, gated community of Whispering Pines, it was supposed to be a quiet weekend of golf and mimosas. Instead, they were treated to the spectacular, violent dismantling of one of their most prominent neighbors. At exactly 8 a.m., a convoy of heavily armored black SUVs and flatbed tow trucks breached the wrought iron gates, completely ignoring the frantic shouts of the private security guards. They rolled to a stop in front of Joshua Trent's sprawling, 10,000-square-foot modern glass mansion. Joshua wasn't there to witness it. He was currently shivering in a 6x8 concrete cell wearing a paper suicide watch gown, but the local news helicopters hovering overhead captured every second of the devastation in glorious high definition. Federal agents and windbreakers swarmed the property. It was the brutal poetry of civil asset forfeiture, weaponized against the very man who had abused it for years. A team of agents breached the multi-car garage. Within 10 minutes, a pristine Lamborghini Aventador, a custom Bentley Continental, and a vintage Porsche 911 were chained to the flatbeds and unceremoniously hauled away, the alarms blaring a pathetic, ignored symphony. Inside the mansion, asset seizure specialists were methodically stripping the house to the studs. Designer furniture, multi-million-dollar modern art installations, and a massive walk-in safe containing $1 million in untraceable gold bullion were cataloged and confiscated. The ultimate humiliation came an hour later. Joshua's wife, a socialite who had happily turned a blind eye to the origins of her immense wealth, was escorted out of the mansion by federal agents, carrying a single, generic cardboard box of personal, non-luxury items. She wept hysterically as an agent officially condemned the property, slapping a bright orange sized by the United States government sticker across the magnificent mahogany front doors. 20 miles away, in a slightly more traditional but equally opulent neighborhood, the exact same scene was playing out at the estate of Nicholas Foster. Foster's seizure was, if anything, more public. His country club membership was publicly revoked via a statement read on live television. The bank holding the mortgage on his massive colonial home foreclosed the moment the federal indictments dropped, citing a criminal enterprise clause in the contract. His wife, refusing to face the sheer social annihilation of being married to a disgraced, federally indicted judge, had packed a single suitcase and fled to her sister's house in Europe before the agents even arrived. By noon, the men who had terrified courtroom 104, who had stolen generational wealth with the strike of a gavel, had been financially and socially atomized. They owned nothing. They were nothing. While the vultures of the media circled the corpses of their ruined empires, a very different scene was unfolding in a quiet, sterile hospital room 1,000 miles away. Alicia Vance stood in the hallway of Boston Pediatric Hospital. She was no longer wearing the intimidating armor of a bar president or the disguise of a public defender. She wore a soft, comfortable cashmere sweater, looking through the large observation window into a private recovery suite. Inside the room, the beeping of medical monitors formed a steady, reassuring rhythm. In the center of the bed lay a tiny, fragile figure 6-year-old Lily. Her chest rose and fell evenly. The complex, life-altering spinal surgery had been a complete, miraculous success. Sitting beside the bed, clutching her daughter's small hand, was Stephanie. The exhausting, terrified aura that had suffocated her in the courtroom was entirely gone. She looked exhausted, yes, but it was the profound, beautiful exhaustion of a mother who had fought a war and won. Alicia gently pushed open the door and stepped inside. Stephanie looked up, her eyes immediately filling with fresh tears, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated gratitude. She stood up, rushing across the room, and threw her arms around Alicia in a tight, desperate hug. "She's going to walk, Miss Vance," Stephanie sobbed into Alicia's shoulder. "The surgeon said she's going to make a full recovery." They did it. Alicia closed her eyes, wrapping her arms around the young mother, allowing a rare, genuine smile to break across her stoic face. "I told you, Stephanie. I made you a promise." Stephanie pulled back, wiping her eyes. "But the money, I don't understand. You said the money they took belonged to the FBI. How did the hospital get paid?" Alicia reached into her bag and pulled out a thick, official-looking document bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice. "When we execute a RICO seizure," Alicia explained softly, "the liquidated assets don't just go into a government black hole. A massive portion of it is diverted into the Federal Victims Restitution Fund." Alicia handed the document to Stephanie. "Joshua Trent and Nicholas Foster stole millions from vulnerable people. We are tracking down every single victim. And you, Stephanie, were the catalyst that brought the entire empire down." Stephanie looked down at the paper. It wasn't just a receipt for the $45,000 surgery. It was a finalized trust document. The federal court has allocated $300,000 from Joshua's seized offshore accounts directly into an educational and medical trust for Lily, Alicia said, her voice filled with quiet, absolute justice. "It's bulletproof. No judge, no lawyer, no cop can ever touch it. It's hers." Stephanie stared at the number, her knees buckling slightly. She fell back into the chair beside her daughter's bed, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the karma that had just rebalanced the scales of her life. Alicia watched them for a moment, the weight of the last 6 months finally lifting from her shoulders. She had stared into the darkest, most corrupt abyss of the legal system, and she had dragged the monsters screaming into the light. She turned and quietly slipped out of the hospital room, leaving the mother and daughter in peace. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Special Agent Miller. "Vance." Miller's voice crackled through the speaker, devoid of its usual calm. "We have a massive problem. Foster just used his one phone call from the federal holding facility. He didn't call a lawyer. He called a burner phone registered to a cartel hitman, the man he hired to murder the journalist 3 years ago. The hit is active, Alicia, and the target is you." Alicia stopped walking. The warm, comforting atmosphere of the hospital hallway seemed to instantly freeze around her. The war wasn't over. A dying beast was always the most dangerous. "Let him try," Alicia whispered, her eyes hardening into obsidian. The rain lashed against the ballistic glass of the State Bar Association penthouse. Silas, a high-tier cartel ghost, slipped through the dark office in a light-absorbing tactical suit. He aimed his suppressed, armor-piercing handgun at the silhouette in the high-backed leather chair. His contract, $2 million to permanently silence Alicia Vance. "I wouldn't," a calm, melodic voice echoed from the corner. Silas spun. The leather chair was empty. Alicia Vance sat casually on a velvet sofa, sipping sparkling water, entirely unbothered by the assassin. "Before you pull that trigger, I highly recommend you check your encrypted offshore wallet," Alicia said smoothly. Silas froze. Keeping his weapon locked on her, he tapped his wrist monitor. Account balance, $0. Status, assets seized. Nicholas Foster's accounts were seized under RICO statutes this morning, Alicia stated. He lied to you. He sent you here knowing full well he couldn't pay. He made you a free pawn. Silas lowered his weapon a fraction. The cartel punished betrayal with medieval brutality. You're alone, he rasped. You're trying to talk your way out. I am never alone. Alicia tapped her tablet. Blinding halogen light exploded through the window. Hovering 50 feet outside was an FBI tactical helicopter, a sniper's laser resting dead center on Silas's chest. Simultaneously, the doors burst open as Special Agent Miller and a heavily armored SWAT team flooded the room. Silas slowly dropped his handgun and raised his hands. Smart man, Alicia said, standing up. Surrender Foster's burner phone and confess, and you get witness protection. Silas let out a mechanical chuckle. Foster is dead anyway, but you should know, he didn't just want you gone. He paid a guard to open Joshua Trent's cell block tonight. He's tying up his loose ends. Alicia's blood ran cold. Miller, she snapped, get a tactical team to the correctional center right now. We are not losing our star witness. In solitary confinement at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, Joshua Trent huddled in terror on his thin mattress. At 1:30 a.m., his heavy steel door unlatched. It wasn't a guard. A massive, heavily tattooed inmate stepped inside, raising a plexiglass shiv. Foster says goodbye, the inmate grunted. Joshua screamed, scrambling backward against the concrete wall. Boom! A flashbang grenade detonated in the corridor. 3 FBI SWAT operators breached the cell instantly, slamming the assassin to the floor and locking him in cuffs within seconds. A pair of polished black heels stepped into the cell. Alicia Vance stood in the doorway, staring down at the trembling former prosecutor. Foster just tried to have you slaughtered, Joshua. He was going to use your corpse as a scapegoat. Joshua crawled forward, gripping the hem of Alicia's trousers, his arrogance permanently shattered. Please, he wept frantically. I have it all. The zoning payoffs, the offshore shells, the hidden ledgers. I'll wear a wire. Just get me out of here. Agent Miller will take your confession, Alicia said with profound disgust. Leave out a single comma, and I throw you right back. 9 hours later, Courtroom 1 was thick with electric tension. Nicholas Foster sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. He sneered confidently, assuming Alicia was dead in a morgue and Joshua was bleeding out in his cell. Then, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Alicia walked down the center aisle in a flawless white suit, looking magnificent and utterly untouchable. Walking behind her, surrounded by U.S. Marshals, was a terrified, bruised Joshua Trent. Foster's smug sneer vanished instantly. He let out a choked gasp, stumbling backward and gripping the table as his entire reality fractured. Alicia stopped directly in front of Foster, leaning in to whisper, Your hitman gave us the phone, Nicholas, and your partner just gave us the keys to your kingdom. Prepare for the slaughter. The trial of the United States v. Nicholas Foster was not a battle. It was a highly televised execution. It lasted exactly 2 weeks. Foster's high-priced, desperately retained defense attorneys watched in horrified silence as their case was systematically pulverized into dust. Joshua Trent spent 3 days on the stand, weeping as he meticulously detailed the architecture of the extortion pipeline. Silas, the cartel ghost, appeared via secure video link from a federal bunker, playing the audio recordings of Foster ordering the assassination of the bar president. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliberate. They returned guilty verdicts on all 47 counts, including racketeering, wire fraud, judicial extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. Now, the courtroom was silent, waiting for the final drop of the guillotine. It was sentencing day. The gallery was filled with the victims. Stephanie Miller sat in the second row, holding her daughter Lily's hand. The little girl was wearing a back brace, but she was sitting up straight, her eyes wide as she watched the proceedings. The trust fund Alicia had secured from Joshua's offshore accounts had completely covered the surgery and secured Lily's future. Sitting directly behind the prosecution table was Marcus Reed, the investigative journalist. He was wearing a sharp new suit, his back straight, his eyes burning with vindication. Alicia's task force had dismantled his fraudulent conviction within days. He had been fully exonerated, released, and awarded a staggering multi-million-dollar settlement from the state. Nicholas Foster sat at the defense table. He was a hollowed-out ghost of the tyrant who had once ruled courtroom 104. His silver hair was patchy and unkempt, his florid skin now a sickly, pallid gray. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been completely extinguished, replaced by the blank, thousand-yard stare of a man who knew his life was effectively over. The presiding federal judge, an austere woman named Justice Sterling, looked down from her high bench. She did not look bored. She looked disgusted. "Before I deliver the sentence," Justice Sterling said, her voice ringing out like a cracked bell, "the court recognizes Alicia Vance, president of the State Bar Association, representing the integrity of the legal profession in this state." Alicia stood. She was wearing her signature blood-red blazer, a deliberate callback to the day she had first dismantled Foster's courtroom. She approached the podium, resting her hands on the polished wood. She didn't look at her notes. She looked directly at Nicholas Foster. For 15 years, Nicholas Foster weaponized the very institution designed to protect the vulnerable, Alicia began, her voice rich, steady, and echoing with undeniable power. He looked at a single mother holding her sick child's surgery fund, and he saw a payday. He looked at a brilliant journalist asking the right questions, and he saw a threat to be buried alive. He did not sit on a bench of justice. He sat on a throne of extortion. Foster squeezed his eyes shut, unable to meet her piercing gaze. A judge is entrusted with the sacred power to alter the trajectory of human lives, Alicia continued, her voice rising, filling every corner of the vast room. When that power is used not to shield the innocent, but to slaughter them for profit, it is a betrayal so profound it shakes the very foundation of our society. Nicholas Foster thought he was above the law. Today, he will learn that the law is a mountain, and it is finally falling on him. Alicia stepped back from the podium, taking her seat. Justice Sterling nodded grimly. "Nicholas Foster, stand up." Foster's attorneys had to physically pull him to his feet. He swayed slightly, gripping the table for support. "I have presided over federal courts for 30 years, Justice Sterling said, her voice dripping with ice. "I have sentenced murderers, cartel bosses, and terrorists. But the sheer, calculated depravity of your actions using the American justice system as a personal weapon of mass destruction makes you one of the most repugnant individuals I have ever encountered. You are a stain on this profession." Foster let out a quiet, pathetic sob. "On the charges of racketeering, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder," the judge declared, raising her heavy wooden gavel, "I sentence you to life in federal prison, without the possibility of parole." The gallery erupted into cheers, but Justice Sterling raised her hand, silencing them. She wasn't finished. The poetry of hard karma had one final stanza. "Furthermore," Justice Sterling continued, her eyes locking onto Foster, "the court has received a special administrative request regarding your placement, which I have aggressively approved. You will not be serving your time in a minimum security, white-collar facility." Foster's head snapped up, genuine panic flooding his sunken eyes. "You are remanded to the custody of the ADX Florence Supermax facility," the judge stated, her words dropping like anvils. "Specifically, you will be housed in Unit H, the exact same unit, and the exact same 6x8 concrete cell, where you illegally imprisoned Marcus Reed for 3 years. You will spend the rest of your natural life surrounded by the very people you framed." Foster collapsed. His legs gave out completely, and he crashed onto the floor of the courtroom, weeping hysterically, screaming for mercy that would never come. 2 massive U.S. Marshals hauled him up by his armpits, dragging him toward the side door. As they dragged him past the prosecution table, Foster's wildly thrashing eyes locked onto Alicia Vance one final time. Alicia stood perfectly still. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply adjusted her sleeves, looking at him with the cold, absolute finality of justice served. Crack. The gavel struck the wood, echoing like a gunshot. The monster was finally caged, and the scales were permanently rebalanced. The gavel's echo serves as a brutal reminder that power without empathy is a disease, and the law, when wielded by the corrupt, is nothing more than a weapon of mass destruction. Alicia Vance's ruthless dismantling of Nicholas Foster proves that true justice isn't found in avoiding the darkness, but in dragging the monsters screaming into the light. The scales will always balance, and karma never misses its appointment. No matter how high the throne, gravity remains absolute. If this story of devastating legal revenge and hard karma kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another epic tale of justice served. Let me know in the comments below. What was the most satisfying moment of Foster's downfall? See you in the next video.